Well, a big good afternoon to everyone. I don't know whether there's anyone from Crantock has formally welcomed you to Crantock, but if they haven't, well, welcome to Crantock. It's a fabulous village, and we're delighted to see so many people here this afternoon. I'm going to get my excuses in early. I've been away for several months, so I came back to find I was doing this talk, and I got the news from two different people, and they gave me two different topics. So at 7 o'clock this morning, I was trying to meld them together, so excuses if it sounds a bit disjointed. Well, I moved to Crantock nearly 70 years ago when I was obviously a baby in arms. And I think ever since I've been associated with Crantock, I worked away and I've come back to live in the village. It's been a special sort of place. And one thing that I think strikes people, even people who have just moved to the village, is once they start walking around the place, they realise that it has an age to it. It does feel quite an old place, and certain parts of this village do feel quite old, even as you walk through them. Now, over the last 200 years, there have been quite a few archaeological finds in the village, and the most recent was right across the road with the new development at Halwyn, where they discovered some Bronze Age pottery. There have been other medieval brooches found, and in the centre of the village, just below the church, at the beginning of last year, a series of graves were unearthed, and the Cornwall Archaeological Society unit came in and they did a proper dig on the site and discovered 3 or 4 interments. Those the bones that they raised from that are currently being dated, but the current thought is that they're probably either Iron Age or early medieval. In fact, a significant proportion of the housing in Crantock is not that old. It dates from the 18th, 19th centuries. And there are many recorded instances of skeletal remains being uncovered when these houses were being built or when they were being modernised. And most of these date from as I said, the Iron Age to the medieval period. Now, in particular, the land on the west of Beach Road, if you know Crantock at all, if you go from the village and go down to the Beach Road, on the right-hand side, you've got the church standing up above the ground, up on the hill. On the left-hand side, they found an awful lot of skeletons. In 1856, when they were building one of the bigger houses down there, they uncovered at least 26 skeletons, of which the vast majority were female, apparently. Now, they didn't do any proper survey as these bones. They just dug a pit and threw them all into the pit. So every time they do some work on that house, they tend to bring up some more of the skeletons that were buried before. Now, if you look at all those houses on the left-hand side as you go down Beach Road, every single one of those houses, when they've dug in the garden, they found some form of bones or stone coffins. And in fact, it's now recognised that the original burial ground associated with that church was about 5 times bigger than the one that you can see today. And the majority of it spreads off to the west of the church. So there's a lot of history in that part of the region, in that region of the village. And we've also got to consider, I expect some of you heard the legend of Langurra, or Langurra, the lost city that supposedly had 7 churches, was the biggest city in Britain and stretched from Crantock down to Perranzabuloe. The large size of the original burial ground, in fact, does suggest that Crantock Church was a hub, serving several of the parishes in the region, from Perranzabuloe to Regera to Newlyn East and up as far as St Columb and Columb. Now, the city of Langurra is almost certainly a bit of folklore, but undoubtedly there was a population here very early on, and sadly the inhabitants of Langurra were overwhelmed by a sandstorm that blew for 3 days because the inhabitants had become so depraved after associating with criminals that had been brought to the area to build the harbour. Now, the Christian church in Crantock dedicated to St. Crantock, or various spellings of his name. We believe was founded in the 5th or 6th century as a Welsh saint, a Welsh missionary. And the church was eventually supporting a college that predates the Norman conquest. So there was a Christian college in this village before 1066. And at one time it was extremely rich. It's not actually clear how it was so rich because the area is not renowned for wealth. But it's, as I said, no one really knows when it was founded. But in the 13th century, it was described as the richest estate in Cornwall. It not only predates the Glasney College at Penryn, but also Oxford and Cambridge. And at its height, it was bigger than Glasney College and supported a dean and at least 9 senior academics. Now, from all the pre-Christian finds, it's almost certain that the church was established on a pre-existing Celtic religious site, which suggests that this village has been permanently inhabited for over 5,000 years. And I think that's what it contributes in some way to the feeling of age associated with it. Now, one of the chapels that is documented that was within the original church boundary was dedicated to St. Ambrose. Some would say St. Ambrosca. And there's a local house, in fact, as you go down Beach Road on the left-hand side, it was a house that was built in 1856 when they found all the bodies. And that is now named St. Ambrose. So the name has carried on through the years. Now, who was St. Ambrose? I can't find of any St. Ambrose anywhere else in Cornwall or even in England.
Italian bishop.
He was an Italian bishop. He was the Bishop of Milan between 374 and 397. And he's reputed to have specialised in the conversion of Celts to Christianity. So perhaps this is another piece in the jigsaw puzzle about when the Christian community was established in Crantock. So perhaps St. Crantock didn't found the Christian community, but was actually visiting an established church. Now, some of you may remember Nick Cahill from Cornwall Council. Fantastic man. Now, he was convinced that Crantock was Roman. And he was convinced on this on a number of points, but one of them was the rectangular layout of both the original cemetery and also the whole village is based on a sort of rectangular layout, which is typical, apparently, of a Roman outpost. One thing that's never happened in Crantock is to have a detailed survey, a proper archaeological survey. It's always relied on odd finds. And no one has really pulled the whole thing together to establish what's happened here over the last 5,000 years. The other reason why the Romans might have been here is because nearby on Newlyn Downs, you've got extensive lead mining and also silver mining. The lead that was mined from around here was very heavily contaminated with silver. And Crantock was known to support both lead and silver smelting works in the 19th century. And there are remains on the riverbank suggesting a very much earlier operation. And for the last 18 months, I've been trying to get the National Trust archaeologists to come out, and at last I think I've succeeded, because we want to see whether anyone else can establish how old one of the smelting chambers is that is evident on the beach. Now, the church eventually fell into disrepair even before the dissolution. The central tower collapsed in 1412. You see, it hasn't got a central tower now. They've rebuilt the tower on the end. Now, it's thought that the collapse of the tower was caused by the weak sand rock that was used in the construction. And if you go into the church, you will see that it's composed of a number of different types of stone, but one of them appears to be a sandstone. And the geologists believe that this was quarried from a site now hidden beneath the sand dunes. In fact, you can see a layer of sand rock clearly from the beach. If you stand on the beach and look back, you'll see the sort of normal shale, then you'll see a line that runs right across the beach of sandstone that is very soft. And so it's this weak sandstone. Apparently, according to the geologists, as a construction stone, it's probably the youngest geologically anywhere in England. Now, the college was eventually disbanded during the dissolution. However, unlike Glasney College, it was not demolished, and many of the associated buildings appear to have been incorporated into living accommodation for the villagers, as well as into the church. It also provided almost certainly the building that is now the Old Albion pub. In fact, the inhabitants of the college were at one point admonished for using one of the college buildings as a public house. There's quite a history of the college that I'll come on to perhaps later on. Now, the Dean's house, the deanery, that would have been quite a grand building, we believe. It is alluded to as a ruined mansion in the mid-19th century in what was then called Carnes Meadow, which is a plot of land that's now built on to the to the west of Green Lane. I don't know whether you know Green Lane, that runs out from the centre of the village direct to the back of the beach. So in perhaps 5,000 years, we don't really know how the village has developed, but we do know that it has almost certainly been permanently inhabited. Now, over the last 15 years, we've had a very graphic demonstration of the power of the sea and how in a very short time the coast and the river can be affected. The study of the 1840 tithe map and register lists many fields that are identified with the prefix sandy, especially to the west of the current buildings. Langurrock appears on several plots of land. And the disposition of the burials and the drifted sand suggests that Crantock was probably centred much more to the west than it is now, and probably ran out towards the beach. Further, the River Gannel was certainly much more extensive than it is today. It was probably more like the rias that you get on the south coast. It would have looked more like the Fowl, the Helford, or the Foy. It would have been much deeper than it is today. A survey of the river soon after the Wheel Rose mining disaster in 1846 described how the river had silted significantly since the turn of the century. Prior to the fouling by mine waste washed down from Newland Downs, the river had been much wider and it had been deeper with a gravel bed from the sea to well above Trevemper Bridge. And even as late as 1840, the river was navigable by sort of 50 to 100 ton ships up as far as the bridge at Trevemper, the roundabout at the bottom of the traffic jam that you've all been fighting your way through. And underneath that roundabout, there are a number of docks that have now been filled in, where the Martin family had an established merchant business dealing in coal, fertiliser, building materials. And when the docks closed, the Martin family moved up the hill to Treloggan, towards Treloggan at Treviddick. And sadly, all those beautiful buildings were knocked down for this latest development. So that's a bit about Crantock, but we must not also forget Penpole, which is a little creek that runs up on the side of this side of the river. Old maps again identify fields named after a coal depot and a chapel, some remains of which survived until the 19th century. There's also the Waymarker Cross at the top of Osborth Hill, which clearly was a way to signposting towards a fording point of the river. Now, folklore suggests that Penpole was a substantial port for the import of slate used to build Truro. Some people still refer to the Truro Quay at Penpole. As the Gannel was the westernmost limit of the port of Padstow in those days, with slate exporting quays at Port Isaac and Delabol within the eastern boundary, so that no landing taxes were due. And it's still possible to trace an overland route from Penpole directly to Truro that includes the long, straight Scotland Road. Penpole Woods are widely believed to be haunted, and the Gannel Crake is sometimes said to live there. Now, for an amateur historian like me, and I'd say a very amateur historian like me, it's from the Industrial Revolution that the number of resources increases. So we have things like the Kres and Kernow indices enabling you to find information, Ancestry.com that seems to have tied everything up, the parish records and newspaper archives. And they're now available and accessible, although the cost of them is always increasing. But we must not forget the non-digital records, such as those available within the Courtney Library. And one such document is William Stevens's Material for the History of the Church and Parish of Crantock, which was written around about the 1900s. And it gives a detailed account of the church college, of its history and all its staff, from around 1300 until the dissolution. Now, William Stevens was a doctor in Newquay, as some of you will know, and at the end of the 19th century, and he lived in what is now Porthbere Manor. Before that, he lived in what is now the little restaurant below there, Gwenna. He was a descendant of the Crantock Stevens family that farmed at Westmintire. And another scion of the Stevens family ran the mill at Triego for several generations. Now, the Industrial Revolution impacted Crantock in much the same way as the rest of Cornwall. Throughout the late 18th and 19th centuries, the River Gannel was a significant port, providing an outlet for mineral ores, lead, silver, and a bit later the iron ore that was taken out of the Perran iron lode. But it was also used for imports of fertiliser and building materials. It's probably during this period that the training wall, referred to locally as the Crantock's breakwater, was constructed to constrain the water to run against East Bentire. Unfortunately, no records have been found referring to this structure, and does not appear on any of the maps that date back to the beginning of the 19th century. Even recent Ordnance Survey maps do not show that structure. The Gannel finally silted up too badly, and the East Wheel Rose mining disaster reportedly left over a metre of sludge across the whole of Crantock Beach. For ships to move beyond Fernbrit, and for the development of the harbour at Newquay, it was abandoned as a shipping port at the beginning of the 20th century. Now, unfortunately, the training wall, which I remember as a boy when we moved here, did fall into disrepair several times, and was rebuilt by Newquay Urban District Council, as it was in the 80s. But about 15 years ago, it was finally completely overwhelmed, and Crantock Beach has never been the same. And if anybody has seen the beach over the last 10 years, it's changed dramatically in shape. It so demonstrates just how powerful the sea is on this coast. Now, although Crantock was primarily a farming community, the downturn in mining, and thus the Cornish economy, led to many families emigrating to the new worlds of America, Australia, and New Zealand. The principal families of Crantock in the 19th century, the Johns, Martins, Chegwiddens, Praters, Hawkes, Stevens, and Jenkins, all saw the children moving away from the village. Today, there are virtually none of the old family names left in the parish, although there are some descendants. Now, I believe that it's our long history as a community, perhaps subconsciously, that provides a basis for the interest in our Cornish story cafes that tell tales of the old village. Dr. Lamorna Spry had this brilliant idea 10 years ago that we could revive the art of storytelling by introducing these stories about the local community and engaging with the local community to see them. And 10 years ago next month, we gave our first story cafe, the dreaded Marchioness of Abercorn, which was the biggest ship to be wrecked on Crantock Beach. And since then, we've held at least one or two stories every year. These have included a further shipwrecks, abduction of a sweet Crantock maid by pirates, the lost city of Langurrock, the 1920s and 30s with the Bohemian artists that came here, people like Augustus John, Benjamin Britten, and so on. A number of archaeological digs that have taken place, such as the one last year where Cornwall Archaeological Unit came and gave us a very useful introduction to it. And a number of quite colourful family histories. Now, we've got some amazing venues, such as the church, but also the chapel, our local pubs, and we've spread these stories around a number of the sites. And it's not unusual for us now to get audiences approaching 100 who want to come along and hear about this. Although I've noted that if we have a sign that says free pasties, that does seem to increase the number of people. So the Cornish Story Cafes, I think, have been very much of a success. We're always looking for people to come along and tell a story. The idea is that it's not a lecture, it has to be a story. And you don't use PowerPoint if you tell a story. And trying to get that that message across is quite difficult. We've got so used now to the first thing that comes up is the PowerPoint slide. And you look at the bottom, it says 1 of the 150. So as I said, they've been very successful. We're always looking for people to come along and talk to us. And I think it's helped with a village that has seen such a transition over the last 5 or 6 years. We've had over 100 houses have been added to this village with the Hallwyn development over there, Pentire Green on the other side. And so we've got a lot of people in this village now who have no idea what Crantock is about. And I think seeing more and more of these sort of incomers coming along to these stories, I think it's helping to build the community. So if anybody would like to know how we set these Cornish Stories cafes up, don't talk to me, talk to Dr. Spry. Thank you.